All right, and I expect you guys to tell me if something happens with my sound or if you can't see anything. Okay, so we're going to talk about bias and stereotypes tonight in part A, and then part B, we're going to demonstrate how to recognize and prevent them. Okay, so looks like we get an imaginative scenario first. So imagine you're applying for your dream job. You do not get an interview because of your university's reputation. Bias can affect you in everyday life. It's important to identify biases and overcome them. Coming from a sociological background, before I hit computers and stuff, I will say that everyone has biases, and whether they're good or bad, because there can be good biases, there can be bad biases. There's no way to, just like when we talk about risk, there's no way to completely eliminate risk. There's no way to completely eliminate bias, because that's just part of being a social culture. So there's ways to rewrite your bias, and there's ways to identify them and overcome what's been going on. Okay, differences. What do you notice when you see someone? You might notice the person is similar to or different from you. It's just part of human nature. We tend to sort things into categories, and we're not always accurate or helpful when we sort them. We also have a tendency towards binary, black and white thinking as certain cultures, and that's something that you have to stop too. This is good, this is bad. There's a whole rainbow of different reasons and things like that out there, or there's lots of gray if you want to consider it that way. Just think about that too. So what is a bias? It's an inclination to have a certain perspective in favor of or against a person, group of people, or a thing. It's expressed in many ways. It can be prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination. Those are some of the ways that you can express it. So prejudice is an opinion or judgment that is based on feelings or hearsay rather than fact. And that is something that you need to keep in mind there. It's based on feelings or hearsay. It is not facts. So and also one of the fastest ways to identify a prejudice is also the way that they group things. A lot of times the us versus them mentality is also an indicator of a prejudice. I'm pretty sure that everybody at some point in their life has dealt with a prejudice against you, your family member, friends. It touches everybody in one way or another. Inside work, in schools, you're going to run into it wherever you go. Stereotypes. This is a set image or assumption about a person, group of people, or thing, widely recognized by a society as a whole and communicated to us by family, friends, or the media. A lot of the times the media influences it, and then our family and friends will further communicate that to us. So these are based on many factors like appearance, race, class, country or city of origin, gender, sexual orientation, etc. These aren't always negative or totally false, but they aren't always true either. So speaking of online like conspiracies and stereotypes and stuff, so it's kind of like a conspiracy just against people. That's kind of like how I like to think about stereotypes and things like that. If you put it against people, everyone's going to go, oh, no, I don't have that. But if you start out in a way where you are discussing this about either it's about an object and you don't talk about the person at all when you start to bring it up, or you talk about a fictional situation or a TV show, or it's very difficult to get people to face their own stereotypes. So sometimes having a mediator there is also a good way to do it, because otherwise, if you have to bring something up, yeah. Good point, Kat. I like that. The fashion industry would collapse if they adhered to ethical standards. Absolutely. The fashion industry and advertising, those two are great examples of things that would just absolutely collapse. So, but when you're trying to talk to people about certain things like this, sometimes you need a third party, because it's really easy to get into a shouting match because there's a lot of emotions tied to these. Unconscious bias. Now, this is something that happens to all of us. There are things that you don't realize that you have the bias towards, and sometimes it can be a rather rude awakening. So this is the bias we're unaware of or unable to control, happens automatically through quick judgments we make. It's shaped by background experiences, culture, or the world around us as we've experienced it. Yep. A lot of times, for one example, I'm going to use myself for this. I grew up in Idaho, but I grew up, my mom was raised here, but my dad came from back east. So I have a very different view on culture and religion than a lot of people that I grew up with, because my mom grew up here, but she was raised Lutheran because her people come from South Carolina and Louisiana. And my dad grew up Methodist, but he also grew up in an area surrounded by Amish and Mennonite. So I had a large bunch of different religious things to pull on, and different experiences and things to talk to than what the other people that around me that I was growing up with that experienced. So it was always a little bit different for me to talk to them about things, because we had a very different growing up in that particular way. Yep, some people can be biased against stuff from advertising. Yes. And there's tons of different things that you never realize. Like when I went into the sociology classes, I took a sociology and religion class, which I found very interesting. But one of the very first things he said is, at some point in this class, I will make you mad. And at first I was like, oh, I've never heard a teacher talk like this. But he said, there's no point in you being mad. You won't learn. So if you get really angry about what we're talking about, just get up and leave. It's okay. This is a difficult topic, and there's no point in you sitting there and stewing. You're not going to learn when it happens. And it's very ingrained in all of us when we talk about certain social topics. There are triggers that we're not aware of until they get hit. Okay, discrimination. So discrimination is unfair treatment of a person or group based on persons or groups' characteristics. Discrimination can be based on age, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, color, or national origin. And these, I love how that cuts that off on the bottom there. I cannot read what that is. I think, is that pregnancy? I can't read that one. Yeah, anti-Semitism is an excellent example. It's something that I hoped I would never see a rise in. And it makes me very sad that there has been a rise in anti-Semitism in the last 5 to 10 years, because my grandfather was actually a medic in World War II and was with people when they liberated some of the camps from World War II. And it's terrifying to me. But yeah, I think it does say pregnancy, but it's difficult to see. But yeah, there's all sorts of things. So genetic information, which you wouldn't think would be a thing, but if you've ever had a medical condition or a disorder that causes any sort of problems with attendance, which is something I've had from my life, size, career, socioeconomic status, religion, that people can find just about anything to discriminate based on. Discrimination, where does it occur? School, workplace, restaurants, hotels, airports, stores, basically anywhere that people interact with each other. When we attempt to access services such as insurance or self-care, voting, that's another good one. When trying to buy a home. Oh. Yeah, that's actually an interesting way to because of sociology from where I originally came from. The reason I didn't go through sociology is I learned that, sorry, I don't know. Oh, there's someone knocking at my front door. Apologies. We've had someone going around knocking on the doors of my house and my neighbors' houses. So I don't know what is going on. I think they're trying to sign a petition, and it just upset a flood of kitties that just ran past. So if you just heard a herd, that's what it was. No, the neighbor that has a doorbell camera said it looked like some dude possibly with a petition. So none of us are particularly social. We just texted each other. We're like, no, we're not going to open the door. So, as I was going to talk about sociology, I realized that I would have to have a PhD, and you couldn't get those anywhere where I was in order to get them. So it's just kind of a hobby. And then I realized it worked into group behavior is a really good thing to analyze for cybersecurity too. So one thing that is completely different, how an individual acts versus how individuals act in groups, are completely different. And an individual that you have had many interactions with may act completely different when they're in a different group setting. So that's one of those things where you're going to run into, it's possible that this person you've never had problems with before, if they're in a group of people, may act completely different. Okay, so there are some laws against discrimination. There's the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Surprisingly enough, there are a lot of people that are not familiar with this one. Were you guys aware that this was actually a law?
No, not at all.
Yeah, see, I wasn't, there's a few of them, yes, no. It's basically because they had a problem with forced retirement of people that they could do the job this fine. There was no physical or mental or any other problems other than the number that happened to be on the piece of paper. So they created the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, and now it's illegal to discriminate. I think you can't even ask. I mean, I'm not sure on this one, but I don't think you can even ask someone's age during an interview. Because I know there's a bunch, as I've been on interview panels, and there's a bunch of questions you're not supposed to ask. I believe unless you already have that information, I don't think you're supposed to ask, so what is your age? Because I think that's one of those can lead into the discrimination discussions. Yeah, you can guess. It's really not a good idea to guess, though. That's a good way to get yourself in trouble. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act. I think most of us are familiar with that. Almost every university you go to will have an ADA center. Equal Pay Act, Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. Now, I'm betting most of you don't know what this is. Okay, so if you don't know what this one is, it was originally created because insurance companies were discriminating against people who had like immunodeficiency disorders and things like that, and saying, if you have this genetic pre-existing condition, we're going to jack your rates up because we don't want to have to pay for it. So they were just doing all sorts of really terrible things like that, and it was very, very costly. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they were basically saying, we're not going to take the chance that you're going to cost us more money. And in so doing, in the way that they did it, they were blatantly discriminating against people with and using genetic information to do it. So that's what that one was about. There's the Civil Rights Act, Immigration Reform and Control Act, and the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Now, this one I only really know about because I had some friends that dealt with this. It's basically when a woman decides to, or a family decides to have birth, a child, and then it's like, oh, you know, you're going to have a kid, so we're going to do all these things like, you know, ramp up your work, or we're going to not give you your job back. But if it was like some sort of surgery that someone would have the same amount of time that they would have to take off, they could have their job back. There was just there's been a lot of really, yeah, they don't want to give maternity leave. They don't want to give paternity leave. When a lot of the other industrialized nations, in fact, America is one of the most behind when it comes to maternity and paternity leave and benefits and things like that. We're on the bottom of the list, not all the way on the bottom, but we're not that great. So these are some consequences of perpetrators of discrimination. Damages relationships, job loss, loss of customers, decreases revenue, damaged investor and public relations, especially in the age of social media, because they never think, hey, I'm going to do this thing and there might be a bunch of cameras around, you know, and that could be out on social media, and there goes everything. So yeah, reputation is huge, especially when it comes to these. If you are caught, and sometimes even if you aren't caught, if the whiff of a scandal can be enough to cause serious repercussions. So for victims of discrimination, prevented them from accessing necessary services, damaged self-esteem and mental health issues. And in fact, there have been some really interesting studies coming out of what the self-esteem and mental health issues, especially behind like the cyber bullying and cyber discrimination, and because they'd only done like face-to-face on a lot of this stuff. So now they're doing a lot more studies on, hopefully she didn't just turn my volume off. A lot more studies across, you know, the screen-to-screen interactions and what that does for your self-esteem and mental health issues. And it's pretty terrible, actually, from what it's done. Like, yeah, hate speech, what having to do, having to see and experience hate speech on a daily basis. There's some studies out there, and it's pretty demoralizing when you're reading the numbers. And it impacts the ability to, sorry, my tortie is trying to help, form positive relationships, progress in your career, find enjoyment in life. It can cause all sorts of problems. And usually the perpetrators of it are not, either they just don't care or they don't even pay attention. Okay, so overcoming bias. So learning to identify bias prevents discrimination. Even learning to find your own internal biases, even though they're uncomfortable, will also help with that too. Several steps you can take to acknowledge your biases and change your mindset. Learning common stereotypes. Be aware of prevailing stereotypes. Is important to recognize them. Helps you understand how people are impacted by them. Question patterns of thought that reinforce stereotypical ideas. Now that one has been very successful, especially in sociological studies. The more you question patterns like that, the more facts you bring up, the more interactions you have that show, hey, this isn't right, the more success there is on turning those stereotypes around. Acknowledging bias without guilt. No one wants to admit prejudice, but bias affects everyone. Acknowledgement is crucial to overcoming bias. You can't overcome a bias without acknowledging that you have one. And yeah, if you have someone in your life that's really good at saying, hey, I noticed you do XYZ when you're around this type of person. If you really, if they're really good at noticing your behaviors, that's a great person to help you find those biases and work through them. Try not to feel guilty or become angry. It will encourage denial or ignorance. The reason they say that is because it's our natural, when we feel guilty or angry, a lot of us just kind of pull ourselves in, and then we don't go past our normal boundaries to learn about the things that will make us get past those biases. Remind yourself that bias can be overcome. Be careful with first impressions. I try not to always listen to first impressions, because there have been times when a person's had a terrible day and it just happens to be the first day that you meet that person, but they turn out to be a really great person. There's all sorts of reasons that your first impression can go very wrong. So I try to give instead of making just a quick, okay, that person's a write-off on the first time, I try to be like quality over, and try to have more interactions with them and develop an opinion based on all of the interaction I have. That being said, if they're a jerk every time I talk to them, then I will label them a jerk. So it is okay to recognize that, hey, the first day I met you, you were being a jerk, but you're not now. Later on, when you get to know them, you can probably even find out, hey, what happened that day? Oh, someone hit my car, or someone dumped coffee on me, or there's all sorts of things, or I was really nervous. And speaking of that problem that your wife has, when I'm reading, I have the same problem. I look very cranky, and a lot of people will not approach me. I'm usually, which is funny because I'm usually known as the nice one in the department that always gets people sent to them. So whereas I do not look like the nice one when I'm concentrating on something. So yeah, people's facial expressions when they're thinking about things can change, and you never know. Yeah, RBF is very common. I like that. It's absolutely common when you're stressed or you're thinking about something. Your facial expressions tend to convey what's internally happening, and unless you've been trained in like customer service, and even then, sometimes it's very difficult to put on a cheerful face when you do not feel cheerful. So your brain makes rapid fire decisions based on past experiences. So if you have had a lot of bad experiences with someone that reminds you of that person that you're meeting, you may be, oh, hey, this person's going to be terrible to work with. But you need to make sure to try and kind of short circuit those to give that person the benefit of the doubt. It can lead to prejudice for no logical reason. It's just those emotional things that have linked in your brain, that it's like, hey, this person reminds me of Bob. I'm just pulling a random name out. I don't really know anybody named Bob that I hate. This person reminds me of Bob, and Bob was a real jerk to me on multiple occasions, so that means this person must be like Bob. It's just part of how our interactions and sociological behavior work. Like I said, reserve judgment and ask yourself whether opinions are based on instinct or fact. And a lot of times people unconsciously will pick up our cues. So if we're nervous and they can see that we don't really want to talk to them, they will be a little more shy than than they would have otherwise been. So it could be that you're putting off a real, I don't really want to meet you today. I'm having a terrible day. And they're reading that too. So monitor, sorry, this bar goes right across the top here. Monitor and challenge your thoughts. So transform stereotypical thoughts into new ideas. Active process of challenging your thoughts will help shed bias. Now, let's see if they have anything on that. So what they're talking about here with active challenge, I was hoping it was the same thing. Basically, it's just open discussions about bias and stereotypes, but with people that are not going to reinforce your bias and stereotypes. Make sure that it's other people that you feel like you can trust and talk to, but that aren't just going to tell you, hey, yeah, okay, that's a good bias or stereotype to have. That's not going to help you. So you want to be able to comfortably discuss and work to confront your biases and stereotypes with others. And you want others' perspectives, which can help you see ideas in a new way. Yeah, generally speaking, if the person taught you the bias, they're probably, you can talk to them and find out where the bias comes from. Sometimes having a historical route for the bias does help. But sometimes talking to them about the bias, if they were the ones that kind of enforced it, doesn't really help you get out of why you have that bias as well. And Kat, I'm just reading yours. And like Michael said, they've recently discovered that AI has bias based on the types of programmers. They've actually found out that a lot of AI is racist. If it's kind of interesting to find out, but especially facial scanning and a lot of other things like that do not pick up people who have darker skin. And there's all sorts of different things like that, but it's really telling that the AI and the programs that have been developed by humans are also down the line showing our own biases and stereotypes in the formatting themselves. So it really tells you a lot about society, that it's kind of infected our it's that garbage in, garbage out thing is what I think is really happening there. Is they had biases, but they didn't think about them when they were writing these programs. And so they didn't think, oh, I need to be able to write a program that has everybody in there. But so no, I don't ever believe in saying everything, or like it's all the time or everything, or because there's always going to be some situation that will slip through the cracks of always or everything. So it is possible, I will say, that maybe someday in the future they will work out enough kinks to do that. But as of right now, I think that we have too many biases as a society, and so much of that leaks into our technology that we have not found a way to do one without the other, as my personal opinion. Regularly interact with those who are different from you. And this is something that I've strived to do frequently, especially since I got out of high school, because when I graduated from high school and I looked at my graduating class, I realized that there were only 2 African Americans in my entire graduating class of 250. And that was a little disturbing to me. So that told me, hey, I have a lot of people, a lot of different cultures that I know absolutely nothing about, that I have never talked to. Cat, I don't know why you always have to run across the keyboard. So whenever I get the chance, I try to do like culture fairs or different things like that. And I just try as often as possible to, even if it makes me uncomfortable at first, to talk to as many different people within our society as I can. Okay, so because the same thing, lack of knowledge causes prejudice, fear, and discomfort. And if you're never around anybody from that culture, and you feel kind of stupid because you don't know anything about them, A, and B, there's that internalized fear that a lot of us are like, oh, what if I do something wrong? I don't know anything. Uh, when really it is just they are okay with you asking about their culture. It's just you have to learn how to ask about it. So, exchange students a lot of the times love to talk about how things are different from where they came from. Like we had a German exchange student who came here, and she loved to talk about her home life and how it differed from America. And then we had quite a few that came from Thailand when I was at ISU that were just absolute sweethearts and loved everything about America. So they would love to come and be like, here's the difference between my home life is like, and they're fantastic. So a lot of the times, if you can talk to exchange students, they are an excellent source of information about another culture. Yeah, I don't think I've ever met a single Thai person that was an exchange student that was not an absolute sweetheart. They were all very sweet. Yeah, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, my mother was the secretary in the language department when she went to college, so she had quite a bit of Russian, Italian, French, and some Spanish because she also trained in opera. So the different languages there, and I was always fascinated by Russian because they had the Cyrillic alphabet that looked so much different than ours, and I think that is part of what got me into learning about some of the other, like the other countries and stuff too. Okay, find commonalities and embrace diversity. There have been a lot of studies where one of the fastest ways to bridge gaps is to put yourself in a situation with another person, and then find a lot of times they'll do this in training scenarios when you have to get to know people. They'll give you a common problem that you guys have to solve together, and you basically are forced to work towards a common goal. And a lot of the times that's a really good way to get you to work together, to talk things out, because you've got a goal that you have to work towards, and you kind of are forced to overcome a lot of the biases that you would naturally have. All right, the gray zone. Yeah, team building exercises. Yeah, exactly. Sophia wants to try out for the football team. Coach says as a female, she's too small and will get hurt. Sophia feels discriminated against. What do you think? Is this bias, or does Sophia have unrealistic expectations? Okay, so that one's a really
Depends on the
interesting
age group,
argument. Yeah,
first thing.
because I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So go on from there. What do you think?
Depends on the age group, first thing. Like at a pee-wee level, it doesn't really matter. Like most girls are actually taller than boys at that age. Uh, Once you start getting into like later high school levels, competitive like college levels, that's when it starts getting dangerous because at that point the weight difference, the general muscle difference, but at the same time there's also positions that don't require, such as
Right.
kicker,
Like
punter.
running back, or things
Oh
like
no,
that.
running back's going to get nailed.
Oh, that's
The
true.
only
They're
one
the
that
ones that
gets
get piled on, don't they?
Yeah, the only one that gets takes harder hits than running backs generally is either the quarterback if they're not paying attention, or wide receivers going up for passes.
Yeah, and there's some other ones in here. Yeah, and it depends on the woman. Like I've met some women that are really tall. I I think that the ones that I've seen, the schools where they have successfully integrated, it has been based on like kind of like what they do with wrestling, like a weight limit thing. Um, so they do like weigh-ins and they're like, you know, they do it like that. Cause I have seen a few of them where they have like co-ed football teams and co-ed wrestling teams. And it's usually like a weight class systems that I've seen them
I mean,
use.
flag football, no issues. Contact,
Personally, I think contact football is something that is dangerous for most people, and I worry about concussions in everyone. So,
well, I mean, it's kind of the reason why we had like I played lacrosse as well as football, and they had a female lacrosse team that played,
yeah,
and they
I
had
had two cousins that were in lacrosse that were both women.
yep, but mostly just because the I mean, if their parents are all right with it, assuming that they're not an adult, if their parents are all right with it and they're willing to sign waivers, I mean, let the kid play.
Yeah, I think
It
that's
be
what a
on
lot of
them.
them did. Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those ones that I think we have not gotten cat, I like that. I played a lot as a kid and got pulled out for aggression. Yeah. I did a lot of sports when I was younger, but I did like the co-ed softball, and that's kind of different. And I did like soccer and things like that, but it wasn't the full on smashing into each other. I worry about football because I've talked to a lot of um, physical therapists and people and about the injuries that the football players come back with, and it just scares me. I worry seriously about their longevity, especially the pro football players. Um, but the college ones don't seem to have quite as much on the injury scale as the pro ones, but it's still frightening to see the things that they do to their bodies for pro sports. But that's a whole other issue. So yes, I would agree. It depends on a lot of different things, but I can understand why she would feel discriminated against, and I think that would be one of those. It depends on her parents and how aggressive they would be towards a lawsuit, and it Title IX funding, and there's so many different things that would go into that one. But so, do you guys feel like we've gotten a good discussion about cultural and social bias? Are there any other points that you want to bring up? Anything else that you want to talk about? Yeah, I think everyone's pretty good. I think we're all, me, myself, and I are good. Good to know. Yep, I know pretty much all of us have had to go through. Um, I think they do this in public school training now too, but pretty much everybody has to go through um, bias training for employment at least once a year. I think is what most people have to, and then more depending on where you are. So, if you guys feel like everything's good on this and we had some decent discussion, then I think we're good for right now. Your test for the week will be popped up here soon, so you guys can look at that. It will be due. I'm going to do Monday night for you guys on the test, just because you've put up with me having to go through so much with my back injury. And if there are any questions or anything, just stick around if you have anything that you need to go through. And the YouTube channel, I'm still working on updating some stuff. So there'll be some links to videos coming out this weekend for you guys and a new channel link. So if you need anything, stick around. Otherwise, have a great weekend and let me know if you need anything. Talk to you guys later.